Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the creator of the excellent Spider-Man fan comic Spidey Zine, as well as the cartoonist behind a story in the giant-sized Amazing Spider-Man number 25. It's Hannah Blumenreich. Thanks for coming on, Hannah.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, I have to ask, did I get the last name right?
It's good enough. A lot of people are pronouncing it Blumenreich,
Yeah.
which is fine. I always say Reich.
Oh.
I just think it sounds nicer, but I think it's more correct to say Reich.
You know, one of the amazing things about living in 2017 is the fact that you can actually Google how to pronounce Blumenreich. And like the problem is your name has like 5 different pronunciations.
Oh, I didn't know. I've never Googled that. I probably should.
I think you should just go for how you pronounce it.
I'm gonna come up with something really weird and off the wall and be like, that's what it is, you guys.
Yeah, they were like breaking it down by the syllables, and I was like, I don't even know how to say that.
There's like 10 syllables. You have to every letter individually.
I'm kind of envious of your glorious 10-syllable name because I'm just David Harper. It's like, it's kind of boring.
You can drag it out, I think.
Some people have called me David in the past. That's kind of sounds exotic if I do it that way. But so to start things off, I actually want to go back to your beginnings as an artist. Growing up, was art always a big part of your life?
Definitely, yeah. And I was lucky that my parents always encouraged me to do it. I know that's not the case for a lot of artists, but I was, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always drawing. I was not one of the kids who drew on the walls, though, I don't think. I'm always very, respectful of, where drawings should happen.
Sure.
I don't know if that's damaged my skills in any way. Not as adventurous or something.
No, I mean, it's probably a good thing for wherever you lived and wherever you were that you didn't do that. But I don't know, maybe you could have taken it to another level if that was part of your repertoire when you were younger. I guess we'll never know. There's like a sliding doors alternate universe version of you that maybe did that. But
Gwyneth Paltrow.
There you go.
I get to...
So I know you went to school at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, right?
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So how, schooling is different for everybody else. I've talked to a lot of people who love the school experience. They learned a lot from it. And other ones who are like, it was good, but I wish I learned more of this. For you, how impactful was that experience? And going into it, did you know going in that you wanted to make comics with your art?
I did. I went to MCAD, which has a comics program. So I was going specifically for that. As far as skill set goes, I'm not sure how much of an impact art school really had on me, save for a couple classes.
Sure.
That really did leave a big mark. What art school really did offer to me was a sense of community and sort of that instant social circle, I guess. But, it's kind of a hit or miss experience for me, also for others. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's one of those things. Another sliding door is the moment. If I hadn't gone, I don't know if I'd be where I am with the skill set that I have or not. So who can say?
One of the things I've talked to a lot of artists about is, whether or not the schools offer kind of advice on how to market yourself and deal with contracts and things like that. Because that stuff, it's kind of like the boring, lame part of art, but it's also increasingly important these days, especially when, you're doing things on the internet. It's what is legal, what isn't, what works, what does. And I don't know. Did your school go over things like that?
There was a class on that. I don't remember it being particularly useful. And a lot of it, I think, was sort of becoming outdated also because
Sure.
I was going into art school in, the early aughts or mid aughts, I guess. And it was marketing yourself in person wasn't really a thing anymore. It was all online. And that wasn't covered as well as it could have been, I think, because of that shift and who our instructors were and where their background was and stuff like that. So, it wasn't a lot of it I've just had to learn on my own.
Sure. That I mean, that's one of the tricky things is like I went to school for marketing and I graduated I think in like 2006. And
Mhm.
so even then that was kind of like at the forefront of like Facebook becoming like this mothership that kind of owns everyone and things like that. I mean,
Right.
even then like everything that I was kind of learning was kind of outdated, and it was like, you were talking about the professors. They're kind of working from a, I don't know, I don't want to say archaic, but kind of like an older generation's perspective on
Right.
how
They've
marketing
got
is.
like at least 10 years older than you, kind of a gap, right?
Mhm.
Usually. So they're just the methods they use are just different from what's used now, and somehow they still manage to get it to work for them because they've already got their career going. It's totally different.
Yeah. So I want to ask about the kind of like your timeline and how you've worked and everything like that. But I love your journal comics. I think your journal comics are fantastic, especially given the fact that you apparently also share my fear of spiders. I am
They're
like
so scary.
I am deeply arachnophobic. Like I one time had to stop in the middle of traffic because one was on my head.
No, no, no.
I'm glad that you apparently also probably would have stopped. But I'm curious, for your journal comics, was that your first foray into like making your own comics, or did you have something else that kind of kicked you off?
I think I'd been doing them for kind of a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in different like smaller volumes, like little minis that I would sort of I should have just made one large volume of them, but I didn't because you sort of your skill set changes and you look back at your style and like I don't really want people to see that, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
bad when people give me money for it. So um, I guess this would have been, I don't know, a couple of years into making journal comics. It's sort of a good habit that I picked up and then lost. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to add.
Yeah. No, I mean, I find that like I've known a lot of people who've made journal comics. Like, have you ever read Emmy Town by Emmy Lennox?
No.
Okay, well, so she's a cartoonist and she had her own journal comic. It was great. If you ever get a chance, you should read it. But I love seeing things like one of the cool things about journal comics is you can kind of see how you grow and how you kind of change your
Mhm,
approach as you
mhm.
move along. Did you find that like the actual like when you talk to creators, they're always talking about like, oh, the best way to figure things out about making comics and to break in and things like that is to just make comics. When you were making those journal comics in something like Paper and Glass,
Yeah.
how much were you learning on the job? Were you just like picking up a lot as you're moving along?
Yes, definitely. No, doing little journal comics is a really, really good way to boost your skills very quickly.
Hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of it, like with Paper and Glass, that project took me longer than it should have. I think it was one of those comics that just kept getting pushed to the back burner.
Hmm.
And what was kind of nice about doing journal comics in the meantime was that they're not you don't have to commit to them really because
Sure.
you can do them in a couple hours. Whereas something like Paper and Glass, which I think is something in the teens pages long, maybe,
Hmm.
was something that I had to like, work on and be like, okay, this is going to have to look nice. Whereas a journal comic, you can do whatever with it, and if it looks like crap, it doesn't matter. So there's the pressure's off, and it really frees you up, and you grow a lot more when you can work that way versus when you have to like show off what you know, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so journal comics were a lot more beneficial. Um, I should really get back into them.
Well, and I think the thing is like sometimes people think about like journal comics as just being kind of one thing. It's like one page equals one day or this or that. And one of the things that you can do is like it can be a multi-page narrative. It can be a single page. It could be part of a page. It can be any number of things. And I don't know. I feel like that it gives you a lot of room to kind of experiment with formats and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's one of the really nice things about journal comics is just how much you can do with them, especially when it comes to like I've never done it. I don't think I would be able to, but hourly comics day,
Oh God.
when you come out with that, I love reading people's hourlies. I'm like, I'll never make these, but keep them coming.
I am I'm always amazed by how good some of them turn out. I'm just like, how did
Mm,
you do this?
you must be a wizard, obviously.
Clearly, that's actually what I assume about most people who make comics, because I try to
Yes.
draw and just different things come out than when you grab a pen. It's just a wildly different
Right.
experience for me.
No, the nicest feeling in the world is when you have a good drawing day and you're like, yes, hand, that is exactly what I meant to put down. Thank you. And then there's other days and it just doesn't happen, and you're like, don't you test me. You're much smaller than I am. Cut you off.
I've always been curious about that because I mean it makes sense. It's like some days your brain's just not working in a general sense. Like I find that conversations even by themselves can be difficult, and I always try to practice. Not saying like I'm sitting and like having practice conversations or something, but it's like sometimes you trip over your words and you just can't really connect with a conversation.
Sure.
I mean that happens with everybody. The act of drawing is while you have practice and everything built into it, it's still like some mornings, some days you just don't have it, I guess.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. It always happens when deadlines are there too. You're like, oh no, not today, please.
Let's talk a little bit about Spidey Zine. So for those that don't know, Spidey Zine was a fan comic you created collecting a variety of stories about Peter Parker and his life. And I'm curious, how did that first come together? Like, what's the origin story of Spidey Zine?
Well, there's a smaller zine that precedes it, that's called Adventures of Unlucky Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what I called it? I don't remember. And I still have them. They're still for sale. It's not like a really old thing. I just don't remember what I call my own stuff. Um, and that started out kind of as a joke, where me and a friend were joking around about the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. And at the end, Spider-Man jumps onto a flagpole, and the flag is billowing behind him, and it's really cheesy. And we were joking about how funny it would be. A flagpole's like a couple inches wide. So he's got like a really narrow, place to hit. So we were joking about how funny it would be if he missed and hit the flag instead. And with his sticky little appendages, he would just like become horribly entwined in this giant flag and get stuck.
Yeah.
And we were both laughing our heads off at this. And I was like, this is super funny. I'm going to draw a comic. And so I did. And then I started thinking about other ways in which his powers could sort of become, hilariously roadblocky, I guess, just get in his way.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I think what happened is I was also reading some She-Hulk at the time, and I learned that she and Peter were sort of friends within the comics universe. And so I started making little She-Hulk fan comics. And at some point in doing this, I was like, well, I've got to draw this kid without his mask on. And then I drew him because I don't like the original design.
Mm-hmm.
So I made one. And I drew him, and I was like, oh, I'm super charmed by this design I've just made for myself. So I just kept going, and I kept making them, and I started thinking about like the universe that he lives in and who populates it and what his places is in there. And I really started like just building a character off of my own kind of interpretation of what I thought Spider-Man was without having actually really read a great deal of the comics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the funny thing about fan comics is like I don't know, like I've read a lot of the comics, but for some reason, even though I know that your specific vision isn't exactly what, like, he's always in like doom and peril and making deals with the devil and yada yada yada. But for some reason, like reading your Spider-Man comics connects with me as like who the character really is deep down in his core. And I think that's the amazing thing about fan comics is it's like it's almost like this I don't know. It's like a shared I'm trying to think of the right word for it. It's kind of like what our like all idyllic vision, like the pure version of these characters is. And like for me, Spider-Man is always this kid. I mean, he's like that's the funny thing about it, even as an adult, I've always kind of thought him as quintessentially like a teenager. And
I agree.
yeah. Yeah, anyways, and so I think that's the amazing thing about fan comics is like it can create this like shared vision. And I think your comic did it incredibly well.
Well, thank you. I agree as also that like fan work, you can really get this kind of like distilled version of a character.
Mm-hmm.
not held down by everything in the canon. You can kind of really cherry pick what you want, and that's always really interesting, I think.
Yeah, and I also like the fact that I don't know. Growing up, I was a big X-Men fan, and but one of the weird things that made me really like them was they would play baseball, and like it'd be all like the X-Men like playing baseball or something, or like Wolverine would just be like hanging out at a bar or something like that, and it kind of made them feel more like people to me.
Yep.
It was less about being superheroes. Like they're still superheroes, but they're people too, and I kind of miss that. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people connected to your Spidey zine about is like, I kind of feel like Spider-Man or Peter Parker would totally watch Cowboy Bebop. That's just a thing he would do.
Yeah, definitely. I think um, Peter is meant to be, a typical nerd, I think, but I don't know. Once again, I haven't read a great deal of the comics, so maybe it is in there. But I have never really seen him connecting much to nerd culture or like embracing it, and I think he should
Mm-hmm.
because it makes him so insufferable if he's just like really into anime and like whatever he likes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that if you can add that layer of him on, it helps his character so much, and it helps, I don't know, inform his ideas in some bizarre way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm really into Nerd Peter.
I was actually for a piece I'm working on. I've been like going through like the original stuff, like Amazing Fantasy #15, and like the original first issues of like Amazing Spider-Man. And it's funny because like the version of like Peter Parker, young nerd kid they have is just like
Mhm.
seriously, he is like always surrounded by beakers. There's just like scientific equipment around him at all the times, and he's like always hanging out with these other people, and he's like in a lab, and they're all like being cool and fun and stuff. And I just like it is, as important as those comics are, it is just kind of funny that it seemed like a very singularly adult version of what a nerd actually is.
I suppose that comic came out in like what, the early 60s?
1962.
There really wasn't any nerd culture then, was there?
No, not really.
Yeah. So it's something that's really evolved outside of the comic, but hasn't been like uh, applied to his character.
Yeah.
So it's weird that you still have like this old-timey nerd description of like, well, he's into science and that's all. And you're like, but what about the rest of being a nerd? There's so much more to it now. Um, so that's kind of it's a thing that sort of bothers me that it isn't there, you
Yeah.
know.
Do you as a storyteller, do you find that you were reading She-Hulk and you started doing She-Hulk related like comics and everything like that. Do you find that you're like a lot more interested in kind of like the personhood behind them more so than like the superhero part of it?
Definitely. I think I read a lot of the She-Hulk stuff, but I kind of read it out of order in terms of publishing date. So I think I went last to the Charles Soule stuff, and I really liked it a whole
Hmm.
bunch. It's just because he's, a for real life lawyer. So when he writes lawyer characters, he can really get into like these super boring aspects of all this paperwork and all these stupid like red tape things. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want to read. Terrible, boring office drama. Also, sometimes she's huge and green and smashes things.
Yeah, I love that run. Yeah, that run is so good, and it does so much to like actually focus on that. Like the who Jen Walters is as a lawyer, even when she is big and green and everything like that. And
Yeah,
it does have a amazing monkey in it, which is a pretty fantastic addition.
that's true. That's true.
I want to ask about your art, and one of the things I really love about the zine. Actually, before I ask about that, how like what period of time did like the first part of like the Spidey zine that's on your site now to the last part take place? I mean, like for you creating it.
I believe it's about a year old.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I really loved just seeing kind of how your art evolves through it. Like it just kind of gets better and better.
Yeah.
You go. I mean, you go from like black and white and like a little bit more like simple layouts and line work to color with more complicated panel layouts later on. Did you find that you were figuring things out as you were doing it, or was it more just like, oh, this is becoming a real thing? I need to really start kind of throwing down some like
Both.
colors and doing everything like that.
It's both. Um, it was definitely like, because at first I wasn't taking it seriously, so I
Sure.
could just sort of just go at it with whatever mindset I wanted. And I think by the time I made the one about the sweater, I had acquired a Wacom tablet, and I wanted to learn how to use a Wacom tablet.
Hmm.
And figured, well, I've got these Spider-Man comics that I'm sort of churning out. Might as well, do one there and sort of learn the ropes of Photoshop.
Hmm.
And I did, and I was like, all right, this turned out fine. I'll do it again. And then I decided I didn't like drawing on a Wacom tablet. Back to doing it traditionally. But at that point, they were sort of taking off,
Hmm.
and I was like, I didn't really like drawing backgrounds, but I guess when you work with color, it becomes really, really obvious that you haven't put in a background.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, I guess I should really push this. And with every single one, I was like, I really want to push myself more to make this one better than the last.
Hmm.
And it was kind of fun to compete against myself, I guess. And it's true, I did get to look back at like even just one comic before and be like, oh wow, I really like did improve, and that was a lot of fun to see
Hmm.
like progress so quickly, which is nice.
Yeah. I have to say, you kind of picked a tough character to not like doing backgrounds on because he's always swinging
So
between buildings.
it was a mistake.
If only you could reset, you could pick a character that had no backgrounds.
Right, should pick oh gosh, who's the guy who exists in a nothing space? I don't know, Doctor Strange?
Oh, he could just always be in like an astral plane, and it's just like
Yeah.
nothing is going on back there. I think it's funny that you say that, given the fact that so Mike Mignola he
Mhm.
killed Hellboy at least in part so he could no longer have to draw cars.
Oh my God.
And I think that's like one of the he was like, yeah, I sent him to hell so I didn't have to draw cars anymore. And I'm like, I know that's not the entire story, but it's hilarious that that's even part of the story.
No, I believe it entirely. I'd be like, send Peter to the countryside.
I have to say his web swinging would be much more modest at that point.
It's true. I imagine he'd become very frustrated, and he can't. He just has to run, and he's like a little nerd. He looks weird when he runs. Oh,
Hmm.
he's so sad.
I've always wondered, like, so this is a dumb question, and I know that you're probably not necessarily like the perfect person to ask this, but in
Uh-oh.
terms of like modest, like normal person Peter Parker things,
Mhm.
I've always wondered if he just gets things stuck to his hands accidentally.
I was
Like,
just talking about this with my friend Shivana.
really?
Yeah, saying that he would get like one hand stuck to a book, and then he would try to get it off. It would be like a piece of tape, and then gets his
Yeah.
other stuck, and then he's like, oh no. Eventually, he just like winds up on the floor, like stuck to this thing.
Yes. I
You
just imagine him like picking up like a remote control so he can change it to like a different TV show or something like that.
right?
And he,
That remote control is part of your body now, Peter.
yeah, this is just your life now. You are a remote control hand.
Yep.
And, I see. I think that's one of the amazing things is like life is like filled with things like this, and like you have so much ammunition you could do with that.
It's
But going back to your art, so you said you were totally out on the Wacom thing. That's not how you work. But so you work traditionally. How when you're like approaching a story, let's say the Amazing Spider-Man number 25. Um, what's your approach for bringing one of those stories to life? Do you script it first, or are you just like I don't know, kind of figure it out on the page, or how do you work?
I like to work, it kind of depends on the length of the story,
Sure.
but I really like to go in sort of a standard order of like script to thumbnails to layouts to pencils to inks,
Mm-hmm.
which is very typical. And there's a lot of back and forth in the early stages, I think, which has to do with just like editing and making sure that things are not too long or going
Mm-hmm.
on for too long, or that like there's enough beats in the story, that kind of stuff. With shorter comics like the ones that I did for Spidey Zine, at longest they're 4 pages because you can only upload 4 images to Twitter. um, they'd be thumbnail, they're sort of script and thumbnail at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and that would really help me work out pacing. And even then, there's still a lot of back and forth of being like, okay, this is too long, got to get rid of that, or
Mm-hmm.
mash these two bits together, or something like that. Um, but I really enjoy like scripting and penciling, I think, and thumbnailing I can't deal with.
What is it you don't like about thumbnailing?
It's you really have to concentrate when you thumbnail. Like the rest of it, you can kind of just, it's a bit more natural. It just flows out a lot
Sure.
clearer. And then with thumbnailing, you really have to focus on staging and pacing and like shots and that kind of thing. And if you're doing something that's action related, you have to focus a lot on whether or not that's clear. So it's you really, really have to concentrate, and it's exhausting.
Well, it's all problem solving, right? You're like trying to figure
Yeah,
out how the page lays out and how this makes sense and whether like the lettering can work. And that, I mean, that's a lot of concentration.
for sure.
I actually I hadn't thought about asking this, but I didn't realize the reason why the stories were that length was because you were that is awesome. But I mean, like that's a amazing restriction that most people don't have to deal with because like Twitter really does. They limit it to 4 images, so like that effectively makes your story have very specific restrictions. Did you ever get to a point where you're like, oh God, I really want to do this 6-page story, but it won't work for Twitter. What do I do?
Definitely. No, I definitely did. But usually it would go up to like 5 because I would sort of know already. I'd be like, okay, shoot for 4 pages. And then I'd be like, oh, it would work so much nicer if it were 5. And I would just have to just problem solve it down. A lot of times it was just a matter of putting more panels on a page. Um, and no, it's good to have restrictions like that. And I sort of like setting them on myself, even with the Amazing Spider-Man story. You know, it was only 8 pages, and I was writing it and sort of going back in and counting out how many pages I had sort of made for myself, and it went out to like 13, and I was like, oh.
That's awesome. I know you don't actually sell print Spidey zines at cons or online. It's like you give them away to people who buy your other comics. So I mean that's a super smart approach to make sure Marvel doesn't get super mad at you. But I have to ask, when Marvel first reached out to you, were you like a little nervous, like 10% nervous about the email? You're like, what is this going to be?
Yes and no. I should have been more nervous because the first person who emailed me was Will Moss to do
Oh.
a sketch card for Squirrel Girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't recognize his name in my inbox because it was Wilson Moss. And I was like, huh, kind of sounds like Will Moss. That's weird. Delete. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Get that back out, I guess. And I think, like, at some point, I had been doing it long enough that I was like, okay, if they haven't come for me yet, they probably won't. And enough people have been like, oh, well, have they contacted you yet? They should contact you. Have they? So when Nicolo emailed me, I was like, oh, there you are. So.
I have to say, getting the email for getting hired is probably definitely a pretty good indicator that they're not going to be mad at you. But it would be, I would have been nervous. But I mean, Wilson, that's the funny thing is I've had that exact experience because I had Will on my podcast. And I remember seeing Wilson. I'm like, who is Wilson Moss? That's not a real person.
I'm not alone in that because I felt quite dumb after. So good.
I actually got an email once from a person named Jim Lee, and I was really excited. And then I realized it was somebody trying to sell me something, and I got much less excited. So you did the card for Squirrel Girl, which was awesome. You did Ant-Man. I love those cards. How did the Amazing Spider-Man gig come together?
Let's see. I think it was a pretty basic request, which was just, hey, do you want to do a short story in an upcoming oversized issue? And I was like, yes, I do. And I think they were like, cool, well, we can email all the details and stuff. And I think it was around the time that I was going to go to MICE in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I'm actually going to be like in the area because I'm going to be in Massachusetts. I can always go to New York. I've got some friends there. Could go and say hi, write it off as a business trip. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, cool. So we went and I met up with them and we talked out details and things. And they sent me out with like some jumping off points and things like that. And then I just went off and worked on it and sent them my pitches. And one of them I had clearly expanded more than the others. And I was like, this is the one that I like. I don't know about you guys, but this one definitely. And thank God they went for it.
That's awesome. I actually recently wrote an article for like basically the site that was like my dream site to write for. And I remember when I was like hired for it, or when they agreed to my pitch, I think I like first was like catatonic for like a minute, and then I immediately called my wife and I was like, "You won't believe what happened." She's like, "I knew this would happen. Why are you so excited? You're ridiculous."
Right.
I'm curious. Is there a part of you that was just like when they actually hired you, when
Mhm.
you went from doing your Spider-Man fan comic to actually making a comic in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man? Were you a little stunned by that, or were you kind of, I don't know, did that experience kind of pass you by when you actually got hired to work on Squirrel Girl?
That's a good question. Um, Maybe a little bit of both and a little bit of neither. Because definitely when the Scroll Girl thing came around, um, it was like, oh, good, they are going to give me some work,
Hmm.
right? Uh, and then I think there was, now that I think about it, there wasn't that long a gap between that and Spider-Man, but it felt like a long gap. And I was like, so when's the next one? Come on. I know it's coming. So, I guess I think the most nervous I felt about it was when I actually started working.
Oh,
And that
sure.
was like, and at that point it was like, oh my God, I'm gonna fucking do this.
Hmm.
I think it was like when I started scripting or something, and I was like, oh, these words are actually going to show up in a comic, so I should probably make them good. Oh,
Well, it was kind of like you were saying before with with the actual zine, when you went from, when you're starting out just kind of doing it for yourself and posting it online, that's one thing. But then when like the first one, really blows up on Twitter and you're like, "Oh God, what
right?
happened? Now I have thousands of people that are looking at this." And then you release it's like added pressure with each one, and I guess that is kind of like the zenith of it. It's like you've reached the Spider-Man pinnacle, if you will, to a certain degree, and you went from scripting your own one that you didn't know if anybody would read to scripting one that
Right.
was actually going to be printed in a Marvel comic.
I know it's really strange.
It is a good story, but I do think it's pretty cool because there's so many different ways to make it in comics. Like I know people who have found success with web comics. I know people who have had amazing success with Kickstarters,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. There's so many different ways to do it, and you managed to, like, I don't know, kind of in the same like year and a half, 2 year span, go from making a fan comic to working in the actual comic that you're making a fan comic of. And it really shows just how many different paths you can take, and that like you there's no just like one size fits all answer to breaking into comics these days, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I have gone to like comic panels in the past, I haven't in a long time, but when I go, one of the questions that people usually ask is, how did you get your comics job? Or like, how would I break into comics? And everyone has a different answer. And it makes it kind of frustrating on one hand because you're like, there isn't a set path for me to follow, so I don't know what to do.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like there's really some very simple basics, and if you're doing those, you're on the right path
Hmm.
as far as just like making the work and getting it out there. Um, on the other hand, it's like you really got to get it in front of the right people. And what's kind of cool about these is that it's felt like it's kind of been feeling like there's like a grassroots effort to get me a job from like other people, which is really cool. um, but then like I know there's a lot of other people who like have the right connections and things like that, but they also have like the portfolio to back it up, but they can sort of play into like who they know that knows somebody else, and that's always good. Um, and sometimes it's a matter of like having your work published just like in tiers of like noticeability.
Hmm.
So I don't know, it's yeah, everything.
I do you know who Jim Shooter is?
I know of Shooter, sure.
Yeah, so Jim Shooter, God, I'm trying to find the story. I read Marvel Comics: The Untold Story last year, and I never realized it. But basically, Jim Shooter's story was he was like a high schooler, and he had like I think he'd gotten sick or something like that. And so while he was doing it, he was reading a bunch of comics, and he's like, I can do this better. And so he like sends a letter to DC, and he was just like, I want to write comics for you. And basically, that's kind of how his career started in a very basic sense. And I mean, I don't think everybody can like be sick and then like write letters to like the publishers and be like, hey, you should hire me because I know a lot about the Legion of Superheroes.
And they're like, this checks out, you're hired.
If that was the case, I'm pretty sure they would get a lot more people hired because everybody kind of has that story. But
Yeah.
I do think it's pretty awesome though. You went from, you know, kind of, you were doing everything yourself. You're writing, drawing, you're lettering, you're doing, well, I presume you're lettering.
Yeah.
You were doing everything. And then you're working with Jordan Gibson, Jordy Belair, and Clayton Cowles, who are just like awesome, just crazy awesome. What was it like working with people like, you know, that trio on that book?
Well, mostly I was in contact with Jordan
Yeah.
Gibson. And we were sort of wrapping things up at the same time because deadlines are fun. And uh, it was kind of cool to be like, to collaborate on it, I guess. Because I haven't really done that at all. Actually, I've really been sort of on my own, doing my own thing, which I like. Um, and so Jordan got brought on because of, you know, approaching deadlines and everything, and he did a really, really good job. I'm really happy that he was there to fill in for myself. And it's always really cool to see someone else put their work with your work, especially when Jordy Belair's colors came in, because she was really sort of like at the tail end of things. So we didn't get to talk. But when the colors came back, I was like, oh my God, these look so good. You know, like I've kind of been chipping away learning colors in Photoshop on my own. And I was like, okay, I think I got these to a good place. I'm pretty all right with these. And then Jordy Belair's colors come back, and I'm like, never mind, I'll never color again. But for sure, working with other people, you know, it helps. It helps a lot that I know Jordan, and so when we can work together on something, it feels like it's very comfortable and easy, and it's really like easy to be like, hey, can I nitpick like these couple things? And he'll totally do them, and he's completely on board with it. Which is great.
Do you feel like with, you know, you said like when Jordy's colors come in, you're just like, oh, what is this? Like I can never color myself again. Do you feel like looking at that and kind of learning from how, like, you know, how Jordan inks you and how Jordy colors you? And I mean, I don't like lettering for some reason seems like this impossibly difficult task. And like, it's, even though it's probably, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's like you could, I know people who've picked up lettering and done it well. But do you feel like looking at what they did with your work has kind of changed at all how you think about it or how you're approaching your work afterwards?
I think so, yeah. There were absolutely parts when like Jordan would send back a couple panels or an entire page and be like, does this look okay? And I'd be like, oh wow, you totally picked up on things that I wouldn't have at all. And that's always really interesting. And there were definitely things that I would have just not done that he did, which was great, like in a good way, And that was all, that's really cool to see and be like, oh, I guess I can borrow that for myself. Or there's things that he would ink and be like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of doing it this way. So I guess it rubbed off on him too, which is awesome. And then definitely when Jordy's colors come back and you're like, oh, okay, so that's how you do like lighting. So that's how you know, she did these really cool things where Peter's on the stairs and he's looking bummed and she casts him in shadow. And I'm like, that's fucking genius. Well done, Jordy. Have another Eisner, please.
All the Eisners for Jordy. You know, so the comics you did that you posted on Twitter, like, were you know, huge successes, lots and lots of retweets, lots and lots of likes, people talking about it, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, the Amazing Spider-Man Mothership is like a different story. Even to a certain degree, it's a different audience. Do you feel like I saw a lot of the response on Twitter, and it seemed like the comic industry is very much interested in being your PR agent, which I think is fantastic because everybody was like, hire her now, Marvel, stop being stupid. And I was like, I agree, please, more of this. But did you feel like working in that Amazing Spider-Man mothership led you to a different kind of response than what you know saw with Spidey Zine, or was it kind of more, you know, much the same?
I think it kind of aligned. I think it kind of aligned, and a lot of people were like, "Congratulations, you did it!" Like as if I had like pulled myself up over a ledge, and I was like, "I'm safe now. All the jobs, here they are. I found them." Um, so I think a lot of people are super congratulatory, which is awesome. There's still a lot of people who are like, "Is it time for a series yet?" And I'm like, "Oh, look at all you people." So it's really cool that like the fan base that I've managed to like build for myself, which is crazy to say,
Yeah.
um, is really supportive of my work, and they really want to see more of it, and they really want to see more of it legitimized through Marvel, which is awesome. And I don't know that that happens for everybody, and so I'm like really hashtag blessed, I guess.
You know, this is kind of it's something I've kind of thought of because I was reading some of the interviews you've done in the past, and this is definitely something you could count in like a good problem to have category. But
Mhm.
you seem particularly happy when people bring up like your journal comics or Paper and Glass and stuff like that. Are you ever like, you know, I'm more than Spider-Man, or is that not something you're really concerned about at this point?
At this point, it doesn't bother me.
Right.
I definitely like it when people bring up my older stuff because it's like, oh my God, you like dug in and like read my older things, and it's sort of like sort of tickles me, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, but for sure, like I'm not disappointed yet about like a lot of Spider-Man attention because it's still something I'm working like really hard on,
Sure.
um, and something that I've put a lot of time and effort into, and like a lot of frustrations, I guess, have gone
Sure.
into it. Just that sort of thing. So when people compliment me on it, it's still like it's still effective, I
Hmm.
suppose.
So the last question before I get into five random questions about you
Yeah.
is, Amazing Spider-Man number 25 is out,
Mhm.
and you know that was everybody's really excited about it. But I'm curious, like it's you probably can't really talk about what your next steps are, otherwise you probably would be already. But you know, now that you're through that experience, do you kind of feel like you want to get back into like the mini comic zine world, down more of a mainstream publishing route, or is it kind of a mix of both going forward for you?
A mix of both. I really don't have any. I can say safely that I don't have any like big stuff lined up
Sure.
uh, coming up or anything. So I am working on more personal, well, not personal, but like a personal projects that are self-published, that kind of thing. Which is kind of nice in a way because it's one of those things where like I don't have to be worried about presenting something to an editor and being like, oh, are they going to reject this because I'm my editor? And so I present it to me. And I get to be like, looks good, Hannah, publish it. And it's really self-indulgent. It's great. It's very good for me. um, so I'm focusing on that kind of stuff. And what kind of worries me is that a lot of people like came to me because of Spider-Man, which is awesome.
Sure.
Um, but then I'm like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to make my own thing. Will you follow me for that?
Sure.
And I know a fraction of people will, but I'm not sure like how big that fraction is.
Hmm.
And so that's always kind of a gamble, I suppose, with any for any artist or writer or whatever. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the tricky things, but I do kind of feel like in the last 20 years or so, there's definitely been a shift where the characters aren't kind of as much as they used to be. Obviously, if you're like a hardcore Spider-Man, you're like Spider-Man all at your comic book shop, you're going to keep buying Spider-Man, but I feel like the paradigm has kind of shifted to a certain degree where creators like people will follow you because they like you and they like what you do and like the way you approach stories. So I will definitely be interested to see how it plays out, but I feel like I don't know, I feel like people like you for your work, so I'll be, I don't know, it's great.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
So to close, I want to ask five random questions
Yes.
about you, a person. And you're from Minneapolis, and I have to start with my first question I ask anyone that's from Minneapolis, given the fact that the only time I ever went there, I was 12 years old.
Okay.
What's your favorite ride at Valley Fair?
I don't like rides.
Oh no! That is a fail of a question.
Like to destroy this first question. Um, I am not a big Valley Fair fan. I get really scared on fast rides. So there's like my two things already that distance myself from Peter. I don't like spiders and I don't like going around fast in the air.
So are you saying that the Spidey zine is not autobiographical?
No, no. I have yet to make this experience very personal.
Do you like Cowboy Bebop though?
I do.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'm sorry I led with a busted question. The hilarious thing is I also did not like rides, but I went to Valley Fair in 1996, and I have this weird theory, and I also tried this on spiders. It did not work. Is that if I like kind of immerse myself in something I'm scared of, that
Oh,
it
sure.
will work out. Like I'll get over it. And with roller coasters,
Oh, no.
I went on the corkscrew there,
Oh, no.
and I had never ridden one before, and I was like a mix between crying and laughing the entire time.
Yep.
And after that, I love roller coasters. Spiders did not work out. I tried taking pictures of them. I was like, oh, this will make me feel better. It made me feel bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like I've lived like alone without roommates for a long time, and when I had roommates, the last roommate I had was a good friend of mine. He's a dude, and he's a big guy. He's like super like works out a lot, super tall, big guy.
Hmm.
And so whenever there was like a spider or a millipede, I'd be like, Ben, go get it. And he would. And he would always catch and release. And I was like, no, kill them. They'll come back.
I feel like I know where that part of your journal comic came from. You never know. I always kind of feel like it, like the word is going to get out about you and they're going to tell their spider friends. I'm like, nah, I'm out on that. I am out on
I know.
that.
And if you kill them, they know they can smell the little corpses. And they're like, oh, don't go in there.
Retribution.
Yeah, she'll mess you up. Um, but I've been like on my own for a long time. So when there's spiders now, it's sort of a thing of like, all right, you're over there, I'm over here. If you don't move, I won't move.
Hmm.
And that's I have to like talk a deal out with them. They don't
Yeah.
know. They don't speak English.
My wife does the same thing, and I feel like I'm like, they don't speak English, Amber. They're not going to listen to you. The spider will still come for me when you're not around. And she's like, oh my God, don't be afraid of spider. It's so small. But I'm like, I can't help it. So the next question I have for you is the title of your Amazing Spider-Man number 25 comic is Mutt's Ado About Nothing.
Mhm.
It's the best title ever.
Oh,
I,
thank
I
you.
have to ask, was the title your creation?
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. It is. I think I was sitting around like thinking of stupid puns, essentially. Like, this is the stupidest pun I can think of. Wouldn't it be funny if I used it for my title? And then I couldn't think of anything else to replace it.
I support it wholeheartedly. I am a big fan of puns, and that was glorious. Next question: if you in interviews I've read with you, you've talked up anime and manga is something that you kind of grew up on and something you particularly enjoy. If you had this is tough. If you had to hand someone one movie and one manga series to get them hooked, what would you pick?
Ooh. Movie and series?
Movie and like manga series, like book series.
Oh,
If
okay. And they've never had any before.
correct.
Maybe Summer Wars?
Ooh, that's Mamoru Hosoda, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I actually just got into him because my a girl that works in my comic shop loaned me A Boy and the Beast and
Yeah.
The Girl Who Leapt Through Time.
Oh my God, so good.
So
So
good.
that was the first movie of his I saw, and I was like, well, that's not, I guess, not including the Digimon movie. But Girls Up Through Time, I saw it and I was just like so enchanted by the drawings and like the colors are like really muted.
Hmm.
Loved how it looked and like, oh my God, it was so, I didn't expect to like get as involved with it as I did when I was watching it. I loved it so much.
Hmm.
But Summer Wars, I think, is a good beginner movie because it like kind of covers all the bases.
Hmm.
Like you've got your slice of life stuff and your family stuff, but there's also like weird sci-fi.
Sure.
So I think that's probably a good entrance movie, I think.
Horrible confession, I have not seen that one yet.
Ooh, it's really good.
I will check it out.
It's the better version of the Digimon movie. It's
Finally.
exactly it's exactly the same, but good. Not that the Digimon movie is bad. I have a it's kind of a guilty pleasure. It's not great. I've got a soft spot for it.
But what about the manga series?
And for manga series, mm, let's see. I think the last manga series I really, really enjoyed was 20th Century Boy or Boys,
Yes.
but I think it's still a little too long for a beginner, so I would say Pluto.
Okay. Yeah, good pick. 20th Century Boys is one of my one or two favorite comics ever. I love it. I love
So
it so
it's
much.
so good. Have you been watching Man Ben at all?
No.
Now Kurosawa does like this documentary series where he sets up for like 24 hours. He sets up cameras in these famous manga artist studios and just like
Oh.
watches them work. And then when it's done and it's recorded and everything, they like watch the footage and comment on it.
Mm-hmm. That's
And it's
crazy.
really good. And it just makes me want to like work.
Did you ever see the Hayao Miyazaki documentary that came out last year or two
Oh
years
my
ago?
God, Kingdom of Dreams and Madness.
Yes.
So good.
It was. It was bonkers though, because he doesn't write a script. He just storyboards.
Oh, I know, I know. I
How
was
does
watching,
that work?
and they're doing it at the same time. Like he's finishing the storyboards while they're working on the movie.
Yeah.
And when they say that, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense as to the way your movies are paced and how
Sure.
like episodic they feel.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just like, no, no, you need to do things and complete them in stages. You crazy man, what are you doing? But I
What?
mean, it's obviously worked for him. So.
Yeah. Hayao Miyazaki, you need to rethink this. This could be
And
done
I mean,
better.
your business plan seems flawed, sir.
Well, maybe, I mean, I think he did just unretire again, so maybe he's going to do a script on the next one.
I know he's like, I finally figured it out.
Yeah,
Sorry, I had it wrong this whole time.
that was it was an enlightening documentary. I was like, wow, he really likes two polar opposite things, smoking and exercising.
I know it's super weird, and like, he's like in his 70s now,
Yeah.
and he's just like chugging away, and smoking and being cranky, and it's great.
It really is great. Those are fantastic recommendations. And, you know, that's one of the things I think about manga that's intimidating is like some of the
With
series are so freaking long.
yes,
Like 20th
yes,
Century Boys, like my library has a really fantastic selection, and that's actually how I got into
same. I
Urasawa.
was reading 20th Century Boys. I was living very briefly in Eugene, Oregon, and they have a really good public library, and especially a really good comic selection for
Hmm.
some reason. And they had the entirety of 20th Century Boys, and someone was reading it at the same time as me, and they were just slightly ahead of me,
Yeah.
so they would keep getting the volumes out when I needed them, and so I started checking out more than I needed at a time so I could beat them. I just became really aggressive about library books.
Oh man, I totally understand. It was weird when I was reading 20th Century Boys the first time because I was like it was transitioning from like I want to read this to I need to read this.
Yes.
And like I got to the point where I think that they were missing like two volumes in the middle of it. I'm like, screw this. I'm just ordering all of it on Amazon.
Yep, yep, yep.
All of it. And next thing you know, I have all of it. And but the good thing for my library is they have Pluto and they have Monster. I don't know if you've read Monster, but
I read the first volume and then took a long time to get the second one, and now I have it. But I tried to start reading it, and I don't remember who any of the characters are. I have to like go back and read the first one again.
Well, that's actually I have a weird experience too because I actually do basically the same thing. For some reason, in Monster, I have the perfect editions. I read the first one, I'm like, oh, this is great, and then I take a big gap, and I'm like, I need to reread the first one again, and then I get the third one, and it keeps stacking up. But oh man, I could talk about this stuff all day.
So,
I wanted to ask about lettering for my next question
okay.
because, like I said, lettering to me seems like this impossible thing, and I see I see letterers who can like hand letter to like crazy small details, and again, I think that they're wizards.
Yeah.
To me, that seems very difficult. Was that the toughest thing to get used to when it came to making your own comics from a creative standpoint, or at least like doing it well?
Maybe. I think lettering is it's kind of a frustrating thing
Hmm.
because you have to do it so no one notices it.
Sure.
And that's sort of obnoxious because you're like, look, I did it really well. And people are like, I haven't seen So, like, no one's going to pay attention to it, which is what you want.
Right.
I think it's sort of, I think the toughest part about lettering is when you do it digitally because it's just one of those things where I'm not quite used to writing on a screen. Um, so I started like lettering over fonts,
Sure.
and that helped. Um, my own handwriting, I'm fine with. So when I just do it traditionally, I don't mind just writing things out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I would love to get better at is like sound effects
Mm.
because now I can't do them at all. But I know Chris Somney, I think, just posted some, or someone posted some of his that he did like some really cool looking sound effects, like hand lettered ones. And I was like, oh, that's what I should be working on. That's what I should be getting good at.
Man, sound effects, I don't know what they are or why this is, but I just like when I see a really like well done, like clever sound effect, I'm just like, yes.
I know it just gets you so good.
It really does. I talked to, I brought this up in a recent podcast too, but I talked to Phonographics, who does a bunch of like great books. He does like Saga, and he's doing Jordy's new book Redlands and yada yada yada. And I interviewed him years ago, back in my infancy of like knowing things about comics, and I asked him like a dumb question. I was like, something about like his lettering standing out and like how he does that and stuff like that. And I remember he said that the thing that he said that if he stands out, he's doing his job wrong.
Right.
And I thought that was a really fascinating insight to it because I'm just like this Philistine who's like, oh, tell me about your pretty letters. And he's just
Right.
like, you're dumb. But yeah, I mean, I don't think comic fans really think about that because it's like, it's something that you're supposed to engage with, but not actually actively think about. So it's interesting.
No, I agree. It's sort of a bizarre skill. And even more than like lettering itself is like word balloons and word balloon placement.
Mm-hmm.
And that one can be tougher, I think. Um, a lot of times when you're like planning out a panel, I
Mm-hmm.
just like forget to leave space for them.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, it's fine. It's totally okay if it like overlaps in here or something. Or sometimes you plan for like a word balloon to fit somewhere, but it's a different size than you intended or
Mm-hmm.
something. So it's just kind of a learning curve for something that seems, I don't know, kind of inconsequential.
Yeah, no,
It's really important.
yeah, I totally feel you. It's like you kind of trap yourself if you don't think about
Yeah,
it beforehand.
yeah.
Um, so the last question I have for you is actually about cons. You were just at Emerald City Comic Con.
Yeah.
When you talked about how when you first met with Marvel, you were at Mice. You've been going to cons for a while now as a creator. How I feel like that might more maybe less so than Twitter response and everything like that, but I feel like that's probably a pretty strong indication as to how like your profile has changed and everything like that. Do you find that your con experience has changed quite a bit since you started doing the Spidey zines?
It has. It was um it's been really cool to watch it progress and to watch things change. I spent a lot of time at Emerald City thinking specifically about like past con experiences. One
Mm-hmm.
in particular that was just like not a good convention for all kinds of reasons that really, really didn't go well. And then like comparatively to Emerald City, which went so well, and like the people like who I've never met before ever in my life came up to me and they love like my work and they just wanted to talk to me about how much they like what I make. And I was like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. And it was amazing. And I could like go up to people like whose work I admired and they knew who I was based on
Mm-hmm.
my work. And it was just crazy. And I'm worried that that's kind of like a thing that I will get used to,
Yeah.
which is good and bad. I mean, it's kind of fun to be like super wide-eyed and stupid about everything, but I guess it's also good because if, it sort of becomes a basic easy thing to, then that means that your career is on a steady track.
I totally understand what you're saying though, because when I was at Emerald City, I got invited out to lunch by some comic people, and I was just like, "Are you sure?"
Right?
Like,
Me?
do you want to do that? Like,
Right?
I'm like the enemy. I'm like the press. I could tweet about this and ruin your career accidentally. I don't mean to, but it just happens. And they're like, yeah, yeah. And I'm just like, okay, if you want to. I just have to say, I absolutely adore your commissions. They have so much life and personality to them, and they're wonderful. So I don't know. I'm really bummed. I was barely at Emerald City this year. It was such a busy con, and like the Artist Alley, like it was busy.
It was. Um, it was cool that there was like so many, so many people all the time. Um, and sometimes it was like I'm really glad that I'm behind this table and not in that crowd.
Hmm.
And the only times I really had to get out from behind my table, well, when I was walking around, but also was when I had to do like panels,
Sure.
and then I had to like it was more than just exploring the floor I'm on. It was just like now you have to go downstairs and deal with people on escalators who aren't moving, and you're just like everybody, please get out of my way. I'm on a time schedule.
Yeah, I actually I have no reason to have a table really, but I've sometimes fantasized about when I go to Emerald City or some other con, just like maybe I'm gonna get a table for myself just so I can have a place to sit for a while.
Right? To just like anchor yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like I always kind of feel bad for creators. Like I walk by and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go say hi to that person, and they're like wolfing down a sandwich before somebody comes to talk to them. And I'm
Right?
like, I don't want to be that person who bothers you while you're eating your sandwich. But
No,
cons are amazing experiences, but they seem like I've always been interested from a creator's perspective because it seems like it could be like I don't know. It's weird to meet all these people, but I'm glad it's exciting too.
no, definitely. Um, and it's been cool. It's one of those things where like everyone that everyone was saying this, but like everyone that we knew from Twitter was there, so it was like real life Twitter, and we could all like look around and be like, oh my God, I follow all these people online, and here you are in person. It's great.
It's a
Um, yeah, so it's just like cool to meet everybody, I suppose.
hmm.
Um, and it's been cool to watch the experience of going to a con change as like my work changes and as my like audience grows and
Hmm.
um I know people are more tend to be a bit more bold online in terms of like being mean or whatever, and I know that a lot of people who have faced a lot of like particularly mean online commenters don't get that in real life. So I'm excited for that
Yeah.
to have that covered because like I haven't had a great deal of like bad commenters or anything ever since I stopped posting on Tumblr.
That
Uh,
sounds like a good choice.
but like everyone in like in person, no one really comes up to you to like criticize you to your face,
Hmm.
which is but it's just been like just really nice people who just want to like pass along compliments and like I hope it stays that way.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
I feel like cons are really like it's good for your like creative energy because you feel really good about
Yeah,
yourself afterwards.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, you're like super emotionally exhausted. You're just like, gotta go be alone somewhere very far away and not speak to anyone and have no one speak to me in total silence for like a week.
I have to admit, on Sunday of the con, I was like, my voice was completely out in like 2 days. I was only there for like from Friday until like Monday morning, and I was like, I can't even talk to people on the floor. I'm just gonna go watch Get Out in a movie theater,
Oh, I
and
haven't seen that. I really want to.
it's very good. I highly recommend it. I will let you go so you can go see that or go watch Mamoru Hosoda movies. But thank you so much for
Uh,
chatting with me. I really appreciate you taking
oh
the
yeah,
time.
no, it's super good to be here in this podcast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Hannah Blumenreich. You can find Hannah on Twitter at HANNAHBLMNRCH, on her website at hannahblumenreich.com, and her work in the recent Amazing Spider-Man number 25. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.